The gala smelled like money and cocktails. Ji-hoon Kong stood near the fountain with a glass he wasn't drinking, watching 300 of Seoul's richest people pretend not to watch him. Somewhere behind him, a string quartet worked through something classical and forgettable. He'd stopped listening to music like that years ago. He'd stopped listening to most things that didn't come out of a 5-year-old's mouth. Which was why the silence from his daughter's direction made his stomach drop before he even turned around. Minso was gone. Not gone. He knew that. Nanny Jisoo would have her within the minute, tiara crooked, megaphone in hand, demanding a full report on enemy movement. But for 1 second, one clean, cold second, his chest did the thing it always did when he couldn't see her. He set the glass down without looking for a table and started walking. Across the garden, close enough to touch the same hedge maze, Ariel was losing an argument with a caterer about ice sculptures. The swan is melting into a duck, she said. That's not a design choice. It's a structural fail. The caterer didn't have an answer for that. Ariel didn't have time to wait for one. She had 400 place settings, one contracted string quartet who kept flatting the same note, and a 6-year-old event coordination business riding on tonight going right. She had told Minji to sit in the catering tent and color. She had known, even as she said it, that Minji would not sit in the catering tent and color. Minji did not sit in the catering tent and color. She had gotten as far as the second course before boredom won. Grown-ups in stiff clothes, waiters carrying trays taller than she was, and no one anywhere doing anything interesting. She slid off her chair, tucked her toy stethoscope into the collar of her dress like a badge, and went looking for something worth diagnosing. She found the fountain. She found the girl. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. They were the same height. Same gap where a baby tooth had come out early. Same white gold marbling across the forehead and around the eyes, like frost someone had painted on with a careful brush, except nobody had painted it. It was just there. On both of them. In the exact same pattern, like a signature written twice. Minso's mouth opened first, and nothing came out. Minji's hand came up instead, one finger, aimed dead center at Minso's face, the way she pointed at kids on the playground right before she said something devastating. Why do you look like me? The words dropped into the space between them like a stone into still water, and for a moment the whole garden seemed to hold its breath along with them. 20 feet away, a champagne glass hit the stone path and shattered. Ji-hoon didn't remember deciding to drop it. He remembered the sound. He remembered his own hand, empty, still curved like it was holding something. He remembered 5 years of a very specific, very buried fact clawing its way back up his throat. There had been 2. The doctors had told him, gently, clinically, the way people deliver things they've rehearsed, that only one had survived. He had held Min Seo in a hospital hallway at 4 in the morning and made himself a promise never to ask about the other one again, because asking hurt, and Kong men did not do things that hurt more than once. He was asking now. His whole body was asking, before his mind had caught up. Across the garden, Ariel heard the glass break and looked up out of old instinct, and then she saw where her daughter was standing, and who she was standing across from, and the ice sculpture stopped being the emergency. She started walking. Then she started moving faster than walking. Because Ariel had spent 5 years telling herself a story about the man who left her, a man who'd apparently taken one look at a baby with skin like frost and decided she wasn't the daughter he wanted. She'd built a whole life on top of that story. Told herself she was fine. Told herself Minji never needed to know the shape of a father who could do that. She had never once considered that the story might be wrong in a direction that made it so much worse. The 2 girls hadn't moved. They were still just looking, studying each other the way children do, without any of the shame adults would have brought to it. Minso's eyes went from the mark on Minji's forehead to the mark near her own hairline, like she was checking a reflection that had wandered off and come back changed. You have my face, Minso said. Not a question this time. An accusation. No, Minji said, already snatching the plastic megaphone right out of Minso's hand before either parent could reach them. You have my face. And your megaphone is loud. Give that back. That is government property. You're not the government. I am practically the government. Somewhere behind them, both parents arrived at the same moment, Ji-hoon from the fountain side, Ariel from the tent side, and stopped so hard their shoes skidded on the gravel. Ji-hoon looked at his daughter. Then he looked at the other one. Then he looked at Ariel, and every carefully filed away year since she disappeared came apart in his hands at once. How? He said. It wasn't even a full sentence. It didn't need to be. Ariel's mouth was already open to answer him with 5 years of rehearsed anger. You left us, you paid us off, you don't get to say, how, like you're the one who lost something, and then she actually looked at him. Really looked. At the way his hands had gone still at his sides like a man bracing for a blow he couldn't see coming. He didn't look like a man who knew the answer. He looked like a man who was about to be as destroyed by it as she was. Neither of them said anything else. The quartet kept playing. The ice swan kept melting into a duck. And between the two adults who couldn't yet speak, 2 5-year-olds who had just met for the first time in their lives stood shoulder to shoulder, already plotting. Captain Pickle told me something like this would happen, Min-ji whispered. Minso's whole face changed. You know Captain Pickle? 6 hours before the gala, the 23rd floor of Kong Innovations was a different kind of battlefield. Ji-hoon Kong sat at the head of a glass conference table, and 11 executives who had built their careers on not flinching were doing everything they could not to flinch. In front of him, a set of quarterly filings with numbers that didn't reconcile. Beside him, silence he hadn't asked anyone to fill. Explain the 12 billion won gap, he said. The CFO's pen stopped moving. There was a reallocation. For the Busan expansion. It's documented. Show me. I can have it pulled together by. Show me now. Nobody in the room breathed the same way twice. This was the Ji-hoon the market feared, the one Forbes Korea had once called the coldest man to ever inherit a warm company. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just sat there, patient as a closing door, until the CFO's hands started shaking on his own tablet. There is no Busan expansion, Ji-hoon said quietly. There never was. You built a fund inside a fund and you thought no one would count twice. The CFO's face went the color of the tablecloth. Security, Ji-hoon said, without looking away from him. Escort Mr. Han out of the building. Legal will be in touch. 2 men in dark suits moved. The CFO didn't argue. Nobody in that room had ever seen anyone argue with Ji-hoon Kong, not once, not in 9 years. Then, from somewhere down the hallway, came a sound none of the security detail had a protocol for. A megaphone crackled to life. Chief Royal Guard. This is Commander Minso. Respond. 11 executives who had just watched a man get fired without raising his voice now watched that same man's shoulders drop half an inch, like a marionette whose strings had gone soft. The door burst open. Minso marched in wearing a tutu over jeans, tiara slightly askew, red megaphone raised like a scepter, trailed by a nanny who had clearly lost this argument 3 hallways ago. Minso. I said respond. I'm in a meeting. This meeting is adjourned, Minso announced to the room, and 11 of Korea's most powerful executives sat frozen, waiting for permission to laugh or too afraid to find out if they were allowed to. Ji-hoon stood. Just like that. Fingers rubbing on his nose bridge 9-figure lawsuit still open on the table, and he stood. Emergency status? He asked her, dead serious, like he was debriefing a general. Red alert. Ajumajisu said no ice cream before dinner. This is tyranny. It is 10 a.m. Tyranny doesn't check the time, Appa. The room exhaled all at once, every single person in it trying not to be the first to smile in front of the chairman, and failing, one by one, like dominoes. He picked her up. Megaphone and all. Meeting adjourned, he stated and walked out of a room that had just watched a career end, carrying the only person alive who had never once been afraid of him. And here he was, this particular Friday, contained a 6-foot-tall billionaire folded into a plastic chair built for someone a third his size. Sit straighter, Minso said, adjusting the tiara she'd forced onto his head 20 minutes earlier. A princess does not slouch. I'm not a princess. You are today. Ji-hoon looked down at himself, pink tulle skirt pulled over his suit trousers, a wand with a star on the end resting uselessly in one hand, knees somewhere up near his ears in a chair that creaked every time he shifted his weight, and made the mistake of sighing. Minso caught it instantly. Was that a sigh? No. That was a sigh. Sighing is disrespect to the crown. She snatched the teapot, plastic, empty, filled with nothing but the memory of imaginary tea, and refilled his invisible cup with tremendous ceremony. Drink your tea properly. Pinky out, she reminded him, without looking up. He extended his pinky. His assistant, visible through the glass wall outside the playhouse, was very deliberately not looking in his direction, which he appreciated more than she would ever know. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. He checked his watch once, which was, apparently, a crime. He lifted the tiny cup with 2 fingers, pinky out, because he'd learned 3 tea parties ago that anything less earned a sentence. I am tired, Ji-hoon muttered. Wrong move. Minso's eyes narrowed with the particular joy of a small tyrant who has just found new evidence. Improper posture. Improper attitude. 10 years, dungeon. I was already sentenced to 10 years an hour ago. 20, then. She said it without missing a beat, entirely pleased with herself, and topped off his invisible tea again like a queen granting one last mercy before the sentence took effect. Say thank you for your tea. Thank you for my tea. Say it like you mean it. He looked at her, small, fierce, utterly unbothered by 9-figure boardrooms or falsified documents, completely undone instead by whether he'd said thank you with enough sincerity, and felt something in his chest loosen that hadn't loosened in longer than 3 weeks. Thank you, he said again, slower, for my tea, your majesty. Minso beamed like he'd just passed a test he didn't know he was taking. Then he coughed and he didn't cover his mouth as he did. Minso studied him for a long second, recalculating, the way she did whenever he got a rule wrong on purpose just to see what she'd do with it. Then she reached for the megaphone resting by her knee, raised it an inch, and delivered her verdict directly into it, right in his ear. 50 years. He didn't argue. He just drank his tea, pinky out, and let everything else wait. That night, after the tiara came off and the megaphone got tucked under her pillow like a teddy bear, Minso asked the question she asked maybe once a month, always at the same hour, always in the dark where she didn't have to see his face change. Appa. Why don't I have a mommy? Jihoon's hand stopped halfway through pulling her blanket up. He didn't answer right away. He never did. He gave her the same 3 sentences he always gave her, some grown-up things are complicated, it's not your fault, I love you enough for 2, and she nodded like she believed him, because she was 5, and 5-year-olds trust the people who tuck them in. He sat with her until she fell asleep. Then he sat there a while longer, in the dark, doing the thing he never let anyone in the building see him do. He still had the photo. One photo, folded soft at the corners from being opened too many times. A woman laughing at something off camera, sunlight catching the side of her face. He didn't look at it every night. Just the nights Minso asked. Every woman he tried to bring home after her, Minso had rejected within the hour, without exception, like she had a radar for anyone who wasn't Ariel. He used to think it was a coincidence. He was starting to wonder if children knew things adults had trained themselves not to. Across the city, in an apartment that smelled like garlic and shea butter instead of imported cologne, a very different kind of tyrant was holding court. Mom. You need water. Ariel looked up from the stack of gala invoices spread across the kitchen table. Why's that, Dr. Minji? Minji had her toy stethoscope pressed to her mother's forearm with the seriousness of a surgeon. You look dry and crusty. Excuse me? Your skin. Crusty. Dehydrated. She said the word slow and proud, like she'd been saving it. I read it in a book. You can't read that well yet. I read pictures. Ariel laughed, the real kind, the kind that came from somewhere low in her chest, and pulled her daughter into her lap, invoices forgotten for a second. This was the whole reason the apartment felt like a home and not just 4 walls with rent due. Minji filled every room she walked into, whether the room wanted filling or not. At school, that same fearlessness came out sharper. A boy named Duho had tried to take her crayons at recess that week, the good ones, the metallics, and Minji hadn't cried, hadn't run to the teacher. She'd looked him dead in the eye and said, flat as a judge reading a verdict, you're going to grow up and still be doing this. Taking things that aren't yours because you're scared people won't give you anything if you ask nice. Duho had blinked at her for a full 10 seconds and then walked away without the crayons. The teacher had called Ariel in for that one, unsure whether to discipline a 5-year-old for verbal assault or ask her where she'd learned to speak like a courtroom drama. Ariel hadn't taught her that. She was almost sure of it. If your kid has ever ended an argument with a grown-up logic they had no business having at 5, comment, Minji Energy, below, my lovelies, I want to see how many of you are raising tiny lawyers. And don't scroll past that subscribe button, because we are about to find out exactly where Minji gets that fire from. That night, after the invoices were done and Minji was finally down, Ariel did the thing she only let herself do a few times a year. She opened the drawer under her bed. Not the top one, the false-bottomed one, the one Minji had never found, though God knew the kid searched everything. Underneath a stack of old tax returns was a single photograph. A man, mid-laugh, caught off guard by whoever was holding the camera. Younger than he'd be now. Softer around the eyes than she imagined he still was, if he was even the same man anymore, if 5 years and a fortune hadn't turned him into someone she wouldn't recognize. She never told Minji about him. Not the good parts, not the bad parts, not any parts. She'd made a decision the day she left Korea with a payoff she never asked for and a baby the hospital said was the only one who'd survived. She wasn't going to raise her daughter on bitterness. Minji would never hear her mother call her father a coward. She would never hear her mother call him anything at all. But Ariel held onto the photo. She told herself it was so Minji would have something, someday, if she ever asked. She didn't let herself examine the other reason too closely, that some stubborn, unburned part of her still believed the man in that photograph hadn't been the one who made the choice to let them go. She put it back in the drawer before she could think about it any further, and went to check that Minji hadn't smuggled the neighbor's cat into her bed again. She had. Dinner in the Kong penthouse started at exactly 7. Minso sat at a table big enough for 12, though it was always just her and Jihoon, across from each other, plates identical down to the garnish because the chef knew better than to serve them differently. Tonight it was grilled fish, rice, and a small green pile of broccoli she was already eyeing like an enemy combatant. She didn't say anything. She never said anything about the broccoli out loud. Saying something out loud meant Appa would notice, and Appa noticing meant a whole conversation about vegetables and growing strong, which she had heard enough times to recite in her sleep. So instead, she waited until he looked down at his phone for exactly 3 seconds, and slid the entire pile off her plate and onto the floor, where a golden retriever the size of a small pony inhaled it without a sound. Ji-hoon looked up half a second too late to catch her, but not too late to notice the empty spot on her plate. Minso. Captain Pickle did it. Captain Pickle is not in this room. He's very fast. Across the city, at almost the exact same hour, a much smaller table in a much smaller kitchen was having the identical argument. Min-ji. Eat your broccoli. Min-ji stared down her plate like it had personally wronged her, then glanced toward the corner of the kitchen where the neighbor's cat had wandered in through the window again, sat, and watched with the patience of something that already knew how this ended. The moment Ariel turned to grab the water pitcher, 3 green florets sailed off the plate and vanished into a waiting mouth that did not chew so much as accept. Min-ji. It wasn't me. There is broccoli on the floor. Captain Pickle likes vegetables. He's very healthy. For a ghost. 2 little girls, 2 different cities, 2 different lives, the same lie, delivered with the same absolute confidence, at almost the same minute on the same clock. My lovelies, if you've ever blamed an invisible friend for something you did 5 minutes ago, I need you in the comments confessing right now, because these 2 are living proof that some things are written into you before you're even born. Subscribe if this is already living rent-free in your head, because it's about to get so much bigger. It didn't stop at broccoli. Minso slept diagonally, every night, no matter how many times the housekeeper straightened the sheets before bed. She woke up sideways, feet dangling off one edge, head hanging off the other, and had never once slept any other way in her life. Min-ji slept diagonally too. Ariel had given up trying to fix it around age 2, after nights of tucking her in straight and finding her rotated 45 degrees by morning like a compass that only pointed one direction. Both girls talked in their sleep, not words, just fragments, the kind of murmuring that made a parent lean in close in the dark and then decide it was nothing. Both girls, when they were thinking hard about something, scrunched the left side of their face and bit the inside of their cheek, an expression so specific that a stranger looking at photographs of both of them side by side would have sworn it was the same child photographed twice. Both girls hated the smell of lavender and loved the smell of rain on hot pavement. Both girls, when they lost an argument, said the exact same 4 words before storming off, "You'll see. Someday." None of it made sense. None of it had an explanation that fit inside either adult's version of events. Ji-hoon believed there had only ever been one daughter to raise, and Ariel believed she alone understood every strange and specific thing about the only child she had. Neither of them knew they were both, independently, raising half of the same person. 5 years ago, the Kong Family Medical Center didn't run on doctors. It ran on grandmother Kong Sun-ok. She'd built her son's empire out of other people's mistakes and her own iron patience, and she was not about to let a girl with no family name and no fortune plant herself in the middle of it, not even a girl her son loved, not even a girl carrying his children. She'd tolerated the relationship as long as it stayed quiet. The pregnancy ended that tolerance. She is not marrying into this family, Sun-ok told Dr. Beck, 3 weeks before Ariel's due date, in a hospital office with the blinds shut. Find a way to make sure she doesn't need to. Dr. Beck had debts. Sun-ok had already paid 2 of them off quietly, which meant he understood exactly what kind of doctor he'd agreed to be the day he cashed the first check. The twins came early, in the middle of a rainstorm, 12 minutes apart. Minso first, healthy, unmarked. Min-ji second, healthy too, but with the vitiligo already visible in a faint dusting across her forehead, the kind that would darken and spread clearly within her first year. Sun-ok saw it before anyone else did. She saw an opportunity before she saw a grandchild. Tell the mother one of them didn't survive, she told Dr. Beck. Tell her the marked one is the one who lived. Tell her my son paid to make sure she never has to see either of them again. And the boy? Dr. Beck asked. He never called Ji-hoon anything but the boy, even now. Tell him she took a payoff. Tell him she ran. Tell him the second child died and she left this one because she knew she couldn't raise her well, wherever she went. It should not have worked. It worked because grief doesn't ask for paperwork. Ariel, drugged and exhausted and told her baby had died, wasn't in any state to demand an autopsy. Ji-hoon, told the woman he loved had taken money and disappeared, wasn't in any state to chase a rumor across an ocean. Dr. Beck falsified exactly 2 documents. A death certificate for a child who never died. A guardianship transfer for a mother who was never asked. Sun-ok kept both, locked in a safe in her private study, for 5 years, insurance, in case either of her lies ever needed defending. She never imagined either child would grow old enough to walk into a garden and recognize her own face on someone else's body. She had planned for grief. She had not planned for 2 5-year-olds with megaphones and stethoscopes deciding, on their own, to become detectives. My lovelies, say it with me in the comments she knew. Every single day for 5 years, that woman knew exactly what she took from both of these families, and let them grieve for nothing. If you're as angry as I am right now, subscribe, because karma is coming for Grandmother Kong, and I don't think even she is ready for how this ends. What made it worse, what made it almost unbearable, if you looked at it from either parent's side, was how close they'd both come to the truth, over and over, without ever reaching it. Ji-hoon had asked, once, in the first year, why there'd been no funeral for the daughter who didn't survive. His mother had told him grief made people do strange things, that Ariel had insisted on handling it privately, overseas, and grief-drunk and heartbroken, he hadn't pushed. He regretted that more than almost anything else he'd never said out loud. Ariel had asked, once, why the man who supposedly paid her off never once tried to see the daughter he'd kept. A lawyer working for the family, one more person on Sun Ok's payroll, had told her some men didn't want reminders of what they walked away from. She'd hated him a little more every year for a cruelty he'd never actually committed. Neither parent lied to their daughter. Neither parent had the truth to lie with. Only one woman in this story always had it, and she'd been sleeping fine every night for 5 years while two little girls who didn't know they were sisters kept dreaming the same dreams, 1,200 miles apart. Ariel got the call on a Tuesday, out of nowhere, and nearly dropped her phone in the sink. The Kong Foundation Gala, her assistant said. They want you. Not your firm. You, specifically. Someone on the board saw the Choi wedding photos and wouldn't take anyone else. Ariel had built her event business from nothing, from a folding table and a laptop and a stubborn refusal to fail in front of her daughter. She'd coordinated weddings, product launches, a senator's retirement party once. She had never once, in 5 years, worked anywhere near the Kong name. She almost said no on reflex, before her business brain elbowed the reflex out of the way. This was 6 figures. This was the kind of contract that stopped being about surviving and started being about building something. She had a daughter to raise on a freelancer's income and a landlord who raised rent every February like clockwork. Take it, she told her assistant, before she could talk herself out of it. She didn't ask whose gala it actually was, not really, didn't let herself think too hard about the surname on the contract, because if she thought about it, she'd have to think about him, and she'd spent 5 years getting very good at not doing that. There are countless Kangs, she told herself. The problem arrived 2 days before the event, in the form of her regular sitter calling in sick with a flu that sounded suspiciously like a boyfriend she'd been complaining about for weeks. I don't have a backup, Ariel said, mostly to herself, staring at her phone like it owed her an answer. Min-ji, coloring at the kitchen table with her stethoscope draped over one shoulder like a stole, didn't even look up. I can come. It's a work thing. I'll be a doctor. I'll check everyone's pulse. It's very professional. Ariel laughed despite herself, despite the migraine already building behind her left eye, despite 400 place settings and an ice sculpture vendor who kept sending swans that looked more like geese. You'll sit in the catering tent. You'll color. You will not diagnose a single person. No promises. My lovelies, if you've ever had to bring your kid to work because life left you no other choice, comment below. Ariel is about to walk into the one building on earth she should never have set foot in, and she has no idea. Across the city, the morning of the gala, Ji-hoon sat through a briefing he barely absorbed. His mother ran through the guest list like she always did, donor by donor, seating chart by seating chart, thorough in the way only a woman defending a fortune could be thorough. He nodded in the right places. He signed where his assistant slid papers in front of him. He didn't ask who was coordinating the event. Sun Ok had handled the vendor selection herself this year, said the last coordinator had been sloppy with the seating, said she wanted someone new, someone sharp. Ji-hoon hadn't cared enough to ask a name. Galas blurred together. Faces blurred together. Only one face in his life had ever stayed sharp after all this time, and she wasn't walking through his door tonight. He'd made sure of that, the day he stopped letting himself hope she might. What he didn't know, what his mother knew exactly, and had known since she'd approved the final vendor contract with a small, private, unreadable smile, was that she had just personally invited the one woman on earth capable of unraveling 5 years of careful lying, straight into her son's front garden. Sun Ok told herself it didn't matter. The vitiligo had been quiet in Minso's case, never developed the way it had in the other girl. No one would connect two little girls who'd never once occupied the same room in their lives, and she was bored. She told herself she needed some fun. She had underestimated exactly one thing, the same thing she'd underestimated the day she made her decision in that hospital office 5 years ago. She had never met either of these children. She had no idea what either of them was capable of once they found something worth chasing. Both of them are walking into that garden tonight, my lovelies, and one of them has spent 5 years building the exact truth the other one's grandmother buried. If you already know, this gala is about to change everything. The catering tent had exactly one exit Min-ji could reach without asking permission, and she took it the second her mother's back was turned. Nobody stopped a small girl in a plain dress moving through a crowd of adults who weren't looking down. She slipped between two waiters carrying trays of something that smelled like truffle, past a cluster of women comparing bracelets, and out into the gardens, where the noise of the party thinned into string music and the cool green smell of clipped hedges. She found the fountain because it was the loudest quiet thing in the whole garden, water falling in a steady hush over white stone, lit gold from underneath. She didn't hear the other footsteps until they were almost on top of her. Minso had taken a different route out, straight through a gap in the hedge maze her nanny always forgot to check, megaphone tucked under one arm like a soldier's rifle, tiara sliding slowly off one side of her head from an afternoon of unauthorized cartwheels. They rounded the fountain from opposite sides and stopped, both of them, at exactly the same moment, close enough now to see each other properly for the first time. Neither girl spoke right away. Minji saw a version of her own face in a dress made of things she didn't have words for yet, lace, beading, fabric that caught the light like it was made of the same stuff as the water behind them. Minso saw a version of her own face in something plain and soft, standing like she didn't need a tiara to feel like she belonged anywhere. Same jaw. Same gap in the same tooth. Same white gold pattern dusted across the forehead, one side heavier than the other, mirrored, like they'd been split down some invisible seam and each kept exactly half. Minji's finger came up first. Why do you look like me? Minso's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. What came out was flat, deadpan, delivered like a briefing. Are you a clone? Sent by the government. To steal my castle. No, you're the clone. Minji reached out and pulled the megaphone clean out of Minso's grip before she could react. And your megaphone is loud. That is government property. You said that already. I'm going to say it again if you don't give it back. Minji held it just out of reach, testing her, the way she tested every kid at school who thought a title meant anything. Minso didn't lunge for it. She just watched, calculating, the exact same way, and something in the stillness between them clicked into place at once, on both sides, like two halves of a hinge finally meeting. They both made the same face. Left cheek pulled tight, teeth pressed into the inside corner of it, the thinking face, the one neither of them knew the other did, the one neither of their parents had ever seen mirrored anywhere but in their own child. Minso's eyes narrowed the way they did right before an idea. Do you want to be vice commander? Minji handed the megaphone back without a fight this time. Depends what the job pays. Snacks. Unlimited snacks. Deal. She raised the megaphone the way she'd seen Minso do it, and pointed it at nobody in particular. Attention, staff, she announced, in a voice pitched exactly like a 5-year-old imitating royalty. There are now 2 commanders. Minso didn't correct the wording. She stood a little straighter instead, like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to say that sentence out loud and mean it. Somewhere behind them, close enough that neither girl noticed yet, a glass hit stone and shattered. Jihoon didn't remember crossing the garden. 1 second he was standing near the string quartet with a glass he wasn't drinking, the next the glass was in pieces at his feet and his legs had already closed the distance without asking permission. He stopped 3 feet from the fountain. 2 girls. Same jaw. Same gap in the same tooth. Same pattern across the forehead, mirrored like a photograph and its negative. His daughter, and a stranger wearing his daughter's face. Minso. She turned, megaphone still raised, tiara hanging by one clip. Appa. This is Vice Commander Minji. He didn't hear the rest of the sentence. His eyes had already gone past his daughter to the other child, cataloging her the way he cataloged a balance sheet that didn't reconcile, looking for the error, needing there to be an error, because the alternative didn't fit inside anything he'd built his life on for 5 years. Ariel arrived from the opposite direction at a near run, heels forgotten somewhere behind her, and stopped so hard the gravel skidded under her feet. She saw him first. 5 years older, sharper around the jaw, exactly as unreadable as she remembered. Then she saw who he was staring at, and her whole body went still in a way that had nothing to do with catching her breath. Minji looked up at her mother, then at the tall man in the expensive suit, then back at her mother, working out the geometry of a stranger who was somehow already important. Mom, why is that man's face doing a thing? Jihoon's mouth opened before his mind had caught up to what it planned to say. How? One word. It wasn't even really a question. It didn't need to be more than that, every year since she disappeared was folded into it. Ariel's hands curled at her sides. 5 years of a story she told herself so many times it had worn smooth, and it came out of her exactly the way she'd rehearsed it in the dark, alone, 100 times. You took my daughter. I searched for you. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. It just went colder, the way it did in boardrooms right before someone lost a job. I had people looking for 2 years. You vanished. You abandoned us. You disappeared. You replaced us. Her voice cracked on the word replaced, and she hated that it cracked, hated that 5 years of composure picked this exact moment to fail her. You paid me to leave and let me believe only one made it? Why? I never paid you anything. Something in his face shifted, not softer, just less certain, like a man realizing the floor under him wasn't where he'd left it. You took the money and ran the day she was born. My mother told me herself. Your mother told me our daughter died. The word landed between them and didn't move. For a second neither of them said anything else. The quartet kept playing somewhere behind the hedges, oblivious. The ice sculpture kept losing its shape into something less like a swan. And between the two adults who had just accused each other of the exact same crime, two 5-year-olds stood very still, watching grown-ups do the thing grown-ups do, talk past each other with everything except the one detail that would fix it. Minso tugged the hem of her father's jacket. Appa. He didn't look down right away. His eyes were still locked on Ariel's, both of them waiting for the other to blink first, neither of them willing to be the one who'd believed a lie for 5 years without checking. Appa, Minso said again, louder this time, megaphone forgotten at her side. She has the same face as me. That got him to look down. I know, he said quietly. So why is everyone yelling instead of asking why? Nobody answered her. Nobody had an answer that made sense yet. But somewhere behind Ji-hoon's ribs, underneath 5 years of certainty he'd built a whole life on top of, something cracked exactly the width of one small girl's question, and didn't close back up. Minso was the one who said it first. New mission. Min-ji, who had been watching the two adults argue in circles for a full minute without either of them actually saying anything useful, nodded like she'd been waiting for someone to call it. Agreed. Neither parent noticed the shift right away, too busy standing on opposite sides of 5 years of certainty, each one waiting for the other to admit fault first. It was Ariel who finally registered that both girls had gone quiet, and quiet from Min-ji always meant something was about to happen. What mission? Minso questioned as if she wasn't the one who said it first herself. Min-ji ignored her, already turning to Ji-hoon instead, voice gone flat and businesslike, the same tone she used when negotiating bedtime extensions. Sorry sir. Do you have Minso hospital papers? The ones from when she was born. Ji-hoon blinked. Somewhere. Why? Because Vice Commander Minso has a birthday too. And I want to know if they match. It was such a small request, dressed up in a 5-year-old's logic, that for a second nobody moved to argue with it. Then Ariel's stomach dropped somewhere past her shoes, because she understood exactly what her daughter had just asked for, even if Min-ji didn't. Min-ji, sweetheart, that's not really something. You said I was born in the rain, Min-ji said, turning to her mother now, the stethoscope still slung around her neck like she was conducting an actual examination. She said she was born in the rain too. That's not normal. That's evidence. Ariel opened her mouth to redirect her, the way she redirected every conversation that got too close to the parts of the past she'd sealed off, and found, for the first time in 5 years, that she didn't actually want to redirect it. Ji-hoon was already on the phone. Not raising his voice. Just short, clipped instructions to someone on the other end. The Busan hospital. Pull my daughter's birth file. Now. And call my mother, tell her to meet me at the house. 20 minutes later, in a side room off the gala hall meant for florists and seating charts, for documents sat on a folding table under bad lighting, a birth record with 2 names on it, a guardianship transfer with a signature Ariel had never seen before in her life, and a death certificate with a date that didn't match anything Ariel remembered from that night, because she'd been drugged and grieving and had never once been shown the paperwork herself. Minso climbed up onto a chair to see better. Min-ji stood on her toes beside her. Same hospital, Minso said, tracing a finger along a line she couldn't fully read yet but had clearly been told to look for. Same day, Min-ji added. 12 minutes apart, Ji-hoon said quietly, reading the timestamp himself for the first time in 5 years, out loud, like saying it might make it less true. Ariel's hand found the edge of the table. Her whole body had gone very still, the way it did right before something broke. There were 2 of us, Min-ji said, looking between the paper and her mother's face, working it out at the exact pace a child works out something too big for the room it's in. The whole time. There were 2 of us and nobody told me. Nobody answered her right away, because both adults were doing the same math at the same time. 5 years too late, Sun-ok's signature on the guardianship transfer, Dr. Beck's name on the death certificate for a child standing very much alive 3 feet away from it, the payoff Ariel never asked for and never received, the search Ji-hoon ran that somehow never once turned up a woman who'd never actually left the country. The anger came first, fast and hot, in both of them at once. Then, right behind it, before either could hold on to the anger long enough to aim it somewhere, the grief arrived, 5 wasted years of it, 5 years of raising half of something and calling it whole, 5 years of 2 little girls dreaming the same dreams on opposite sides of a lie neither of them had asked to be born into. Ariel sat down hard in the nearest chair, because her legs had stopped being reliable. Ji-hoon didn't sit. He just stood there, staring at the death certificate his mother had signed off on, feeling something in his chest give way that had been holding steady for 5 years by sheer force of will. Minso climbed down off her chair and slipped her hand into her sister's without being told to, the way children do when they understand something is wrong before they understand what it is. Are we in trouble? Min-ji whispered. No, Minso said, with the total, uncomplicated confidence of someone who had just solved her first case. They are. Sun-ok was still in her evening dress when Ji-hoon walked into her study without knocking. She saw the folder under his arm before she saw his face, and something in her posture changed by exactly 1 degree, not fear. She didn't do fear. Just recalculation, the same cold arithmetic she'd been running her whole life. You called ahead of yourself, she said. That's not like you. 12 minutes apart. He set the folder on her desk, hard enough that a pen rolled off the edge. Same hospital. Same night. Your signature is on the transfer. Dr. Beck's name is on a death certificate for a girl who is currently asleep down the hall in my house. Sun-ok didn't reach for the folder. She didn't need to. She already knew every word inside it. I protected this family. You destroyed it. Ariel's voice came from the doorway, steadier than she felt, 5 years of rehearsed calm finally spent on the one woman who'd actually earned it. I grieved a daughter who never died. He grieved a woman who never left. You were never going to be enough for this family. Sun-ok said it plainly, without heat, the way she said everything, like cruelty was just another line item. A hospital coordinator with no name behind her. I did what needed doing before either of you did something the family couldn't undo. She has a name. Ji-hoon's voice didn't rise. It went colder instead, the register that used to end careers across a boardroom table. Min-ji. You've had a granddaughter for 5 years and you decided she was a liability instead. What was the point of separation then? Torture? Or are you just a psychopath? For the first time, something in Sun-ok's face slipped, not shame, Ji-hoon would think later, just the particular stillness of a woman watching a plan finally run out of road. What happens now, she said, is up to you. Dr. Beck's confession is already with legal, Ji-hoon said. He gave up everything the second I mentioned prison instead of a payout. Your name is on 2 falsified medical documents and a guardianship fraud that has no statute of limitations in this country. You'd let this become public. Over pride. I'd let this become public, he said, because my daughters deserve a version of this family that doesn't run on lies to protect a name. He didn't wait for her answer. He turned, and Ariel was already turning with him, and Sun-ok was left alone in a study with a folder she'd known was coming since the moment 2 little girls stood face to face at a fountain and asked the one question she'd spent 5 years making sure nobody would ever get to ask. She let out a grin. It took the twins exactly 4 days of living under the same roof part-time to realize that 2 tyrants working together outranked 2 tyrants working alone. They staged the ambush during dinner, which Ariel would later say was strategic. Nobody argues well with a mouth full of rice. Minso set the megaphone down on the table, upright, like a gavel. The council has a proposal. There's no council in the dining room, Ji-hoon said. That's a rule. This is a special session. Ariel exchanged a look with him across the table, the kind of look 2 people share when they've only just started learning each other's faces again and are already being tested on it. What kind of proposal, baby? Min-ji folded her hands the way she'd seen news anchors do it, stethoscope swinging. We've conducted an investigation. Oh no, Ji-hoon said. You 2 clearly like each other, Minso continued, ignoring him completely. You share tea. You share a couch. Mom laughs at his jokes even when they're not funny. They're funny, Ji-hoon said. They're really not, Ariel said, not even looking at him, and Min-ji snorted so hard she nearly lost a grain of rice out her nose. As I was saying, Minso raised the megaphone a half-inch, just enough to make her point without technically breaking the no megaphone at dinner rule. The council has determined the family requires expansion. Ji-hoon set his chopsticks down slowly, sensing the shape of where this was going about 2 seconds before it arrived, and not fast enough to stop it. We want a junior commander, Min-ji announced. A what? Ariel said. A brother, Minso clarified, in case the rank confused her. A little one. Ours. We've already picked the uniform, Min-ji added. It's small. It has a cape. Ariel choked on her water. Ji-hoon reached over automatically to pat her back, which meant that for one full, unplanned second, both parents were leaning toward each other across the table while both daughters watched with matching expressions of extremely satisfied deduction. We are not, Ariel started, wiping her mouth, cheeks doing something complicated. We haven't even, it's been 4 days. 5, actually, Minso said. We're counting. You're counting? Someone has to track departmental growth. Ji-hoon opened his mouth to shut the whole conversation down with the same flat authority he used on boardrooms full of grown men, and found, humiliatingly, that it didn't work on 2 5-year-olds who had already seen him cry once this week and were therefore immune to his voice of command. It doesn't work like that, he said instead, weaker than he meant it to. Why not? Min-ji said. You like her. She likes you. We already agree. That's a majority. That's not how families. 2 votes to 0, Minso said, banging the megaphone once against the table like a gavel. Motion passes. The council will revisit in 1 month. Ariel put her face in her hands, shoulders shaking, unable to tell anyone whether she was laughing or dying. Ji-hoon looked at her, flushed, undone, 5 years of careful distance collapsing under the weight of 2 children who had clearly appointed themselves in charge of his love life without a single vote from him, and found he didn't have an argument left in him either. 1 month, he repeated, mostly to buy himself time. We'll be checking, Min-ji said, already back to eating her rice like she hadn't just reorganized 2 adults' entire relationship in under a minute. 3 weeks later, the house felt different in a way nobody could quite name. Ji-hoon and Ariel sat on the same couch, careful with each other in the way people are when they're rebuilding something instead of pretending it was never broken. It wasn't smooth. There were nights they didn't know what to say, 5 years of separate lives that didn't fold back into one easily. But he made her tea the way she used to take it, without asking, and she'd stopped flinching when he walked into a room, and that was more progress than either of them said out loud. Behind them, on the rug, 2 girls in matching velvet capes were staging what appeared to be a coup. Attention, peasants. Min-ji had the megaphone this time, Min-so standing beside her in full agreement, both tiaras slightly crooked because neither of them had ever once worn one straight. The Royal Council has spoken. We require cookies, Min-so added, for clarity. More cookies, Min-ji corrected. We already had some. Ji-hoon looked over the back of the couch at his daughters, both of them, the word still new enough in his mouth that it caught a little every time he used it, and found he didn't have it in him to argue with a coup that ended in cookies. Chief Royal Guard, Min-so said, testing the old title against a much larger family than the one it used to describe. New rank available. Do you accept? What's the rank? Head peasant. It comes with responsibilities. I accept, he said, and got up to find the cookies, because some negotiations weren't worth winning. Behind him, Ariel laughed the real laugh, the one that used to only exist in a photograph he kept folded soft at the corners, and for the first time in 5 years, he didn't need the photograph to remember what it sounded like. Because sometimes losing half of yourself only makes the reunion twice as loud. My lovelies, tell me in the comments, should the council get their junior commander, or are Ji-hoon and Ariel allowed to date at their own pace for once? Drop your vote below, and if enough of you want more from this family, I'll write it. Subscribe so you don't miss it either way.